My marriage to Sarah didn't die in a fiery crash, it eroded, like a cliffside slowly worn away by a constant, indifferent sea. We met in our late 20s, two ambitious people convinced our shared drive was a foundation for love. I was a software engineer, obsessed with building something from nothing. She was in marketing, all sharp edges and sharper instincts. For a while, it worked. Our life was a curated collection of success, expensive dinners, trendy vacations, a minimalist apartment that looked more like a showroom than a home. We were a power couple, or so we told ourselves. But the connection underneath it all was transactional. Love became a series of checked boxes. Support meant attending networking events, not asking about each other's day. Intimacy was scheduled and often felt like just another item on the to-do list. The cracks started as hairline fractures. I'd work late to meet a deadline for my fledgling startup, Nexus Dynamics, and she'd be coldly furious, not because she missed me, but because I'd missed a reservation at a restaurant she wanted to be seen at. She'd spend thousands on a new wardrobe, and when I'd question it, she'd accuse me of being controlling, of not understanding her needs. Our arguments were never about feelings, they were about resources, time, money, attention. We stopped being partners and became rivals sharing a bed, keeping score in a game neither of us knew how to quit. The final straw was a seemingly small thing. It was our 7th anniversary. I'd booked a weekend at a quiet cabin, a desperate attempt to reconnect away from the noise of the city. She was furious. She'd expected a party, a public declaration of our success. She spent the entire weekend on her phone, scrolling through social media posts of other couples at glamorous events, her silence a louder condemnation than any scream. On the drive home, she finally spoke. "I'm not happy," she said, her voice flat. "And I don't think you are, either." There was no anger, just a cold, clinical assessment. It was the most honest thing she'd said to me in years. We separated a week later. The divorce proceedings were a logical extension of our marriage, a bitter, protracted negotiation over assets. The house, the cars, the investments. It was all about dividing the spoils of a war we'd been fighting since our honeymoon. The one thing I fought for, tooth and nail, was my company. Nexus Dynamics was my child. I'd founded it 2 years after we separated, using an inheritance from my grandfather. It was mine in a way nothing in our marriage had ever been. Sarah, of course, claimed it was a marital asset, a product of the foundation we'd built together. Her lawyer, a shark named Robert Moore, argued that my ambition was nurtured during the marriage, therefore the fruits of that ambition belonged to her. It was absurd, but it was the last battleground. Which brings me to that day. The final hearing. The air in the courtroom was thick with the smell of old wood and antiseptic, a familiar scent I'd come to associate with the slow death of my old life. I sat next to my lawyer, David, a pillar of calm competence. Across the aisle was Sarah, looking like she was about to accept an award, not finalize the end of a decade-long relationship. She wore a tailored, form-fitting navy dress and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was a smirk of pure, unadulterated confidence. I remember thinking how strange it was. We were here to argue about the company, and David had a mountain of evidence proving it was solely mine. Yet, she looked like she'd already won. The judge, a stern woman with a no-nonsense gray bun, called the court to order. "Counselors, are we prepared to proceed with the final arguments regarding Nexus Dynamics, LLC?" David stood. "We are, Your Honor." Robert Moore also rose, smoothing his tie. "We are, Your Honor. But before we begin, my client has a matter of some urgency to bring before the court. A significant change in circumstances that directly impacts the issues of support and the equitable distribution of assets." A cold trickle of dread went down my spine. This was it. This was the source of her smirk. The judge nodded for him to continue. Sarah stood up, and that's when I saw it. The deliberate way she placed a hand on her lower back, the subtle but unmistakable curve of her abdomen beneath the expensive fabric. She was pregnant. Clearly pregnant. My mind went into overdrive, scrambling for a timeline and explanation. We hadn't been together in that way for over 3 years. The last time I'd even been alone with her was at a mutual friend's funeral 8 months ago. This was impossible. "Your Honor," Sarah began, her voice dripping with a practiced, vulnerable tremor. "I am currently 4 months pregnant." She paused, letting the gasps from the few observers in the gallery hang in the air. The court reporter's fingers flew across her machine. This child, she continued, her voice breaking slightly, is the child of my husband, the respondent. She pointed a trembling finger at me. The smirk was gone, replaced by a mask of tragic resilience. Despite our differences, we attempted a reconciliation shortly before the final separation. It was a moment of weakness, of hope. And now, I am carrying his child. Yet, he has made it abundantly clear that he intends to abandon this new family. He refuses to acknowledge the pregnancy, refuses to provide any support. He's trying to wash his hands of us completely so he can run off with his new money and his new life. The audacity of the lie was breathtaking. It was a masterstroke of manipulation. She was painting me as a monster who would abandon his own child, and in doing so, she was not just asking for more money, she was trying to annihilate me socially and legally. If the court believed her, I'd be on the hook for 18 years of child support for a child that wasn't mine, and the sympathy would likely cause the judge to award her my company out of sheer moral outrage. Robert Moore jumped in, his voice oily with faux concern. Your Honor, this changes everything. My client is now facing the prospect of single motherhood. The financial needs, the emotional toll, it's immense. The petitioner's attempt to shirk his responsibilities necessitates a complete re-evaluation. We would ask the court to postpone today's proceedings and order a new financial disclosure. David was on his feet, objecting vehemently, arguing there was no evidence that this was a transparent delay tactic. But the damage was done. The judge looked at me, her expression unreadable but undoubtedly swayed by the powerful image of the abandoned pregnant woman. Sarah risked a glance in my direction, and for a split second, the mask slipped and that triumphant smirk returned. She thought she had me. She thought I was trapped. Deny the child and look like a heartless liar. Accept the lie and be financially enslaved for 2 decades. It was in that moment that a strange calm washed over me. The fear and panic were replaced by a cold, clear certainty. I had a truth she had forgotten about. A truth from a time when we were still pretending to be a team. I stood up. The room went quiet. The judge held up a hand to silence David. Mr. Evans? You have something to add? My heart was a drum in my chest, but my voice was steady. Your Honor, I said, the words echoing in the silent chamber. I've had a vasectomy since 2018. The silence that followed was more profound than any noise I have ever heard. It was the sound of a carefully constructed world shattering into a million pieces. The court reporter froze. Robert Moore's jaw literally dropped open. The judge's eyebrows shot up towards her hairline. But Sarah. Sarah's face was a study in catastrophic collapse. The color drained from her skin so fast it was like watching a glass of milk tip over. Her eyes widened in pure, unadulterated horror. Her jaw worked soundlessly. The smirk didn't just fade, it was erased from existence. She looked like a puppet whose strings had been cut. She swayed on her feet, grabbing the table for support. The performance was over, and the reality was utterly devastating. David recovered first. Your Honor, my client has medical records to substantiate this. We can have them filed immediately. This allegation is not only false, it is a deliberate and malicious attempt to defraud this court. Robert Moore was sputtering. Your Honor, I had no knowledge. I request a recess to consult with my client. The judge's face was a thundercloud. She glared at Sarah with undisguised contempt. Request granted. 15 minutes. And Mr. Moore, I suggest you advise your client of the severe penalties for perjury. She slammed her gavel down. Court is in recess. The moment she left, the courtroom erupted. Sarah was clutching Moore's arm, her face a mask of frantic, whispered panic. She looked like a cornered animal. I sat down, my legs trembling with the aftershock of adrenaline. David clapped me on the back. A vasectomy? You brilliant bastard. You never told me. It was private, I said, my voice hoarse. And it wasn't relevant until she made it so. The rest of the hearing was a formality. When we reconvened, Sarah was a ghost. Moore retracted her statement, mumbling about a mistake. The judge wasn't having it. She eviscerated Sarah from the bench, awarded me my company outright, ordered Sarah to pay a portion of my legal fees, and referred the matter for a perjury investigation. The divorce was granted. I walked out of that courthouse a free man, the weight of the world lifted from my shoulders. The sunlight had never felt so warm. The victory, however, was short-lived. The calls started that evening. First one, then another. Then a flood. My phone became a relentless, vibrating brick. Call after call after call. She called from her number, her mother's number, blocked numbers. She didn't leave messages, it was just a silent, desperate siege. I blocked number after number, but she always found another. The count ticked up, 10, 20, 30. I lost count after 40. I had to turn my phone off just to get some peace. The next day, the texts started. They were a waterfall of emotion, a real-time view of her spiraling mental state. They began with rage, "You humiliated me. You set me up." Then shifted to pleading, "Alex, please, you have to talk to me. My lawyer is dropping me. I could go to jail." Then descended into sheer, unhinged desperation, "I have nothing left. My family hates me. Answer your phone." 43 calls. "Why won't you answer? I'm losing my mind." It was terrifying and pathetic. The woman I had once loved had completely come apart at the seams. A few days later, she showed up at my house, pounding on the door, sobbing hysterically. I didn't answer. She slid down the door and cried for an hour before finally leaving. The next escalation was a rock thrown through the window of my office with a note tied to it, "You ruined everything. Fix it." I went back to the law. I filed a police report for harassment and vandalism, showing them the logs of 43 calls in a single day, the texts, the note. A temporary restraining order was issued. A deputy served it to her. The calls stopped. For 3 days, there was silence. I thought it was over. Then, her mother called my landline. Her voice was ragged with tears. Sarah was in the hospital. She had taken a handful of pills. She was going to be okay physically, but she was in a psychiatric ward, completely broken, and she was begging to see me. Her mother, through her sobs, said the doctors thought seeing me might give her some closure, some calm. She appealed to me for the sake of her daughter's sanity, and for the sake of the unborn baby. Against every instinct and my lawyer's strong advice, I agreed to go. David came with me, and we had a hospital administrator present. The psychiatric ward was quiet and sterile. Sarah looked tiny in the hospital bed, a hollowed-out version of the fierce woman I had married. When she saw me, she started to cry. "Why, Sarah?" I asked, my voice flat. "You had a fair settlement. Why?" She looked at me, her eyes empty. "It wasn't about the money," she whispered. "It was about winning. I hated you for leaving. I wanted to punish you. When I got pregnant, I was scared. The father wanted nothing to do with me. And I saw a way to destroy you. To tie you to me forever through a child. I thought I could take everything from you." She gave a bitter, broken laugh. "And I forgot. I forgot about the vasectomy. In all my planning, I forgot the one thing that made it impossible. How stupid is that?" There it was. The truth. Her scheme wasn't foiled by a brilliant lawyer or a hidden piece of evidence. It was undone by her own arrogance, by a detail she deemed insignificant in her grand plan of revenge. I felt no triumph. Just a deep, weary sadness for the tragedy we had both become. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now I have nothing," she said. "No money. No lawyer. A criminal charge. A baby nobody wants. You won. You're free." I looked at her, the shattered person, and realized my freedom wasn't in beating her in court. It was in walking away from this cycle of hatred. "You need to get better, Sarah," I said softly. "For yourself. And for your child." I turned to leave. "Alex," she called out, her voice desperate. "Will you ever forgive me?" I stopped at the door but didn't turn back. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I hope you can forgive yourself someday. Goodbye." I walked out of the hospital, the door swinging shut behind me. The legal war was over. The harassment had ended. The 43 calls had ceased. And as I stood there, breathing in the cold, clean air, I knew the real work of moving on was just beginning. The divorce was final, but today, I felt like I was finally, truly, free.